Afternoon all. I'm with my good friend Paul Georgiou. And hi Paul.
Hi, could I just start by saying that somebody asked for, no, I am not a botanist. Someone asked that on the previous video.
So the previous video went down overall quite well, didn't it? The Sicilian overview, but we did make one or two inaccuracies. So Paul's been assiduously preparing for this time. We're going to do an overview of the French defence this week.
Of course, this isn't an opening I've played for many years, so should be good.
Okay, so after e4, we covered the Sicilian, just a brief overview last week. Now the French defence is also an opening, of course, that I play a lot. Shall we take it from the black side or the white side, Paul?
Black side, why not?
Black side to start us off with, anyway. Okay, so view flipboard, yep. So French defence is e6. So fundamentally, it's like potentially blocking in the bishop. This c8 bishop is sometimes an issue in the French defence. Black usually accepts a cramped, slightly passive position, but hopes to sort of, sometimes if white's over-ambitious in occupying the centre, it can be undermined. The variations vary in nature and personality, don't they? Because you've got violet variations and gambits even in the Winawer Variation. You've got Tarrasch has got some IQP, I say queen pawn scenarios. There's all sorts of scenarios in the French defence, isn't there?
Well, I mean, it's a very solid opening. Black is preparing the move d5 to stake his claim to the centre. And then how will white deal with the attack on his e-pawn? Would he defend it? Would he advance? Would he exchange?
Yeah, because after e4, white's game is in its last throes. Who said that? Breyer or something?
Gula Breyer.
Right.
In the 1920s.
So e6 is actually preparing to launch an attack on that pawn with d5, but it is hemming in the bishop, so it's not as free as, say, e5 later. And it's tempting white into advancing the pawn when it is attacked, which is the advanced variation. But let's play a move for white. The most popular move for white by far is,
and the best move is d4.
D4, not moving a knight or anything, just playing d4. I guess white can move on other pieces, but we'll look at that later for second move deviations. So d4 for the moment. Now black's logical response now is to carry on with d5.
Of course, there are other moves, but c5 is not really a French. It could be Sicilian, or if white plays d5, it becomes a Benoni.
And this is called Franco-Benoni, isn't it? This e6 then c5. Franco something. We'll look at that later with deviations anyway.
But it's not really a French. It's more like a kind of Sicilian. d5 is the thematic move in the French.
And that can become sort of Benoni, yes. If takes, but sort of transposing potentially into a Benoni structure in a D pawn opening where white hasn't committed
of course,
c4.
The pawn's on the c file rather than the e file.
Yeah.
But it's Benoni type position.
Benoni type position, right.
So d5 is natural and best.
Okay, so here's where the fun starts for the main moves.
White's most popular move these days is knight c3.
So that's the Winawer Variation.
I mean, knight d2 is the Tarrasch,
named after Siegfried Tarrasch,
yeah.
who was an enemy, sort of mortal enemy of Nimzovich, or apparently they had this big rivalry.
Knight c3 isn't the Winawer yet. Knight c3 could be other lines.
Oh right, it's when bishop b4 is played, or after e5.
No, bishop b4 is the Winawer.
Bishop b4 Winawer. Right.
Black can also play knight f6, of course, which is the classical.
Classical, yes. Okay.
But white's other third moves. e5 is the advance.
Advanced variation, just advancing the pawn, gaining space. Trying to expose this bishop as being bad, maybe locking down the pawn structure a bit more.
Well, white would develop either develop a strong pawn chain, or he will give up the pawns and try and keep control of the squares.
That's an idea sort of popularised by Nimzovich, isn't it? Occupying the centre, with the idea of releasing the central occupation to exchange it for control later.
Yes, he did do that in a couple of games against Salway, famous game. And of course white can exchange with e takes d5.
I find this the dullest, and to be honest, in Blitz, to keep some imbalances going. Apparently this is why one of Barnett's top players now, after you've gone, is John Pigott, and he gave up the French because of the exchange. Apparently he plays the Sicilian because it's a bit of a risk if you want to win games and people play e takes.
Well, it's a good way to try and get a draw against a stronger player. But it's never worked against me. I've never lost against the exchange French, and I've won a large majority of the games. Actually,
Alex Eflontis, our good friend Alex, says the same thing, that his results in the exchange French are very, very good. I think you can try for tricks to break the symmetry. If
Well,
white,
we'll look at this later, but there are a lot of nuances.
like knight deploying here to break the symmetry of the pieces, at least anyway. Sometimes.
Yeah, we'll go through that a bit later, I think.
But I'm often playing cheeky queen takes d5, which is not that good. But I've won some games with that in Blitz.
Yes, but it's not very good.
But I don't like the symmetrical pawn structures. That's one thing I don't like from a lot of openings. With like exchange Slav, I just think it's a bit dull sometimes. So
there are always ways to liven these things up. Anyway, we'll start with knight c3.
Yeah. So d4, d5, knight c3 is the most popular move. So inviting the winner or the classical.
Yeah, just look at the classical first.
So knight f6, yes,
is the classical variation. Very solid. And the black is just defending his pawn on d5, and now white has, I think, two main moves, which are bishop g5
yes,
and e5.
yes, bishop g5, which is pinning the knight, or e5 immediately, just chasing the knight immediately away.
And so let's look at say e5.
E5 first, yes.
Yeah, and now black really should play knight d7.
Isn't this the line you beat David Bronstein with? Was that a different line? You beat David Bronstein once at Lloyds Bet Masters.
Yes, it was with this line. Other black moves, knight g8 is obviously not a good move, though I have played it and won with it. But obviously, it's a loss of tempo.
It's not so important in closed positions, this loss of tempo, though.
But white can always play knight b1, taking it into an advanced French.
Knight b1, with the idea maybe of c4.
Well, it's just an advanced French now, isn't it? But another move that I have played is knight e4. Knight e4, this is not very good. White should definitely take it. If he doesn't take it, he's not going to be better. And now I think it could be...
Really? If white doesn't take it, he's not going to be better? So say he plays bishop d3.
Well, then black would just take on c3.
Yes.
He'll reach a Winawer structure, and he's still got his f8 bishop.
f8 bishop, right, without doing loss of the bishop. So something like c5?
Absolutely. I prefer black here.
Right, immediately. Even, but isn't this bishop a bit dangerous? You don't want to go into Greek gifts in this.
This is just an improved version of the Winawer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So knight e4. You definitely recommend taking it on e4.
I think, and then white should play bishop c4.
Bishop c4.
The main idea of this is black can't now play c5 because of d5.
Right. Nice. Right. There's no trick here, is there, with e3? There's no trick, no. Okay. So
if white plays some slower move like knight e2 instead of bishop c4, then black can play c5 and he's definitely in the game. But I think bishop c4 is a problem.
Yeah.
And basically, white's long-term plan is just to round up that e4 pawn.
Yeah.
Not in a rush, very slowly.
I seem to remember Andrew Webster playing this line. He's an IM and that, but he's not that active nowadays for the last few years. But I remember him playing this line. Maybe I don't know if you remember that. Okay, but
I don't. But
okay.
So after e5, knight fd7 is the main move. And now white's most common move is f4.
F4.
And this is certainly one of the main lines of the French.
Yeah.
And black always plays c5 here, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3.
Yes, this is looking like your game against David Bronstein, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually black has three different plans here. I think one is queen b6, which is a line where black sacrifices a piece of 3 pawns.
I've used that so many times on my channel. It's quite exciting, isn't it? The game c3 takes
b4. Yeah.
Yeah, it's lost popularity because I think white's established ways of getting a clear advantage.
Yes, this is thought to no longer be very good.
I think someone mentioned b5 though immediately as an idea.
White reroutes the knight from b2 to d3.
Yeah, I've lost. That's my one loss in the Middlesex League actually to a Kiki. But apparently, he knew this line anyway from years back. But that's lost popularity. That piece, that line, Queen B6.
Yes, basically it's thought not to be very good. Another system black plays is the old-fashioned A6.
Yeah, I think this is dangerous for black though. I've seen lots of wins at chess game, or more wins for white, because white has got that a wedge in the centre and attacking opportunities. Black can continue on the queen side, but it's a bit dangerous for black on the king side, as usual, as you'd expect from this pawn chain.
It's a solid, reliable way of playing it. Problem is f5 is difficult to get in because black can take on d4 and then e5 may well be on priest.
Yeah, strategically you never want to play c4 because of f5 being. You want to keep your tension in the centre to be able to react.
Unless if white's castled queenside, then c4 is sometimes possible.
Yes. Followed
by a very quick pawn rush down the board.
Yes, if it's justified by the king being on c1, then sometimes it's justified. Yeah. You've hacked me up in that in a few blitz games in the past, I seem to remember. So that's one of the main plans, isn't it? A6.
So Queen B6 is the old move. A6 is another old move. But more recently, people have been playing Bishop E7 and castles.
Really, just castling kingside?
Yes, immediately.
So say Bishop D3. Was that a bad move, Bishop D3 here?
But it looks slightly odd.
Yeah, actually, maybe that
Queen D2 is more logical.
Yes.
And then black castles. And wait to see what white does.
Right, and maybe there's f6 later.
F6 is a possibility. And black delays his queenside play for. He may just swap on d4.
Yes.
He can even possibly sacrifice a pawn by playing b5 straight away.
Blimey, especially if white castles queenside.
Yes, it's a possibility.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
So that's an overview of the f4 line, which remains very much in vogue. One of the most highly theoretical and played lines in the French defence.
Yeah, it's dangerous for black. I think black's got to know stuff. So that's so e5 has got bite to it with f4.
And now also we look at other alternative moves for white. Knight ce2 was fashionable once, but not played so much these days. Basically, the idea is after c5. White would just play c3.
I think I've looked this up once in chess games comment, and this does afford, because of that black control b5 here.
Yeah, black can play an early b5.
Yeah.
And white will probably play f4 and knight f3 and gradually build up.
Yeah.
But black can get his player going on the queenside very quickly with the b4 break.
b6, b4, yeah.
This is not played so much
and
these
try
days.
Maybe get the bishop exchanged off ideally at some point.
Possibly. White's kingside development is rather slow, and this has dropped in popularity. Yeah.
Okay, so knight ce2 was an old-fashioned type move.
Another move is sort of Nimzovic'ian, knight f3, and the idea of this is after c5, white just concedes the centre.
Just takes, or
yes, white just takes,
and then bishop d3.
Puts bishop on d3.
So it's all overprotecting e5, and just going to put a rook on e1 later, and just make this a strong point.
And try to get a grip.
Yeah.
They put bishop on f4, rook on e1, try and hold the e5 and d4 squares.
Sometimes it's good for black to undermine immediately before the grip takes hold with f6, isn't it? I'm not sure it's possible here. There might be some tactic like knight g5 or something.
I mean, but black has to be careful with his king still in the centre.
Yeah, I think knight g5, knight e5. I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's quite risky.
Yeah.
But this is another way for white to play it. He doesn't try to erect a pawn chain, he just tries to gain squares for his pieces. And one other move we should look at, instead of knight f3, is a recent idea, queen h5.
Blimey, isn't this Haldane attack?
The Haldane hack.
I've played him in a blitz, I'm lucky to draw. He's very dangerous, isn't he?
Invented by the strong club player Robin Haldane from Streatham and Brixton Chess Club. And this is actually, theoretically we're not sure, but it's actually pretty dangerous. Black can lose very, very quickly if he is not careful. There are jumping off points for the white pieces, g5 and b5.
So say natural c5 is played.
Well, for example, here now bishop g5 is dangerous.
Say queen b6.
Already I'm looking at moves like castles.
See knight d5 might be possible in e6.
I mean, I'm not sure if it works here, but this type of thing does tend to happen. I don't think it actually quite works here. Maybe
Knight b5 or something. Yeah, but it is
For
dangerous.
example, go bishop g5, for example. Let's just say bishop. That looks very risky. But let's say bishop g5, bishop e7, for example. I think this is a known idea. And now knight b5 is played. Yes, knight b5, and you can't take the bishop because of knight d6 and mate on f7.
Yeah.
So black tries castling. I think what can happen here is bishop takes e7, queen takes, knight c7,
Yeah.
which is winning the rook. And now black can almost get out of it with clever move knight f6. But watch what happens now. E takes f6, queen takes c7, queen g5, g6,
Mating.
queen h6.
Yep.
End of game. And this sort of thing could happen so much in the Haldane hack. Black really has to be on his mettle.
Yeah, it's dangerous. I think it's mentioned in Watson's Dangerous Weapons book, Queen H5.
It is certainly a dangerous weapon.
Yeah. Okay, so all right, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's a cool overview there of the moves there. In knight f6, so the classical variation knight f6.
Of course, after knight f6, the alternative for white, the main one, is bishop g5.
Bishop g5. Yes. So yes, this is what's most commonly played when I've been recently playing this variation. And here, I like personally to take on e4, but bishop e7 I think is more popular, isn't it?
Well, bishop e7 is very solid. Very solid move. And now white has some options. There's a line which perhaps slightly dubiously, white can take on f6 with the bishop. This is possible, but not the best. And after takes, it plays e5, bishop e7, queen g4.
Yeah.
I believe this is called the Anderson attack.
Right.
And black has to watch out he doesn't get mated very quickly. For example, castles, bishop d3, and all sorts of nasty things can happen with something like knight f3, h4, and bishop takes h7.
Is that Adolf Anderson after
yes, after Adolf Anderson,
yeah,
I believe.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's
this is not actually very good, but black has to be very careful.
Yeah.
In the long term, that bishop on e7 is a very good piece.
Yeah, if black can survive the onslaught.
But this is not thought highly of, but it's a good try for a blitz game.
So this is immediate bishop f6.
Yeah.
But I think what's also really dangerous though is just e5.
E5 is the main main move.
But after this, I wonder, even a GM lost to recently, Simon Williams lost as black in British Championships. This, which I've been playing in blitz, this h4 Alekhine Chatard.
The Alekhine Chatard, which is still thought of as pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
But black, of course, doesn't have to take it, though he can. I think it's certainly seen as viable to take the pawn and try and weather the storm.
So taking, but now there's all sorts of things. I think Alekhine and Meti both played.
Played knight h3,
and then you got.
But the knight on f4.
Possibilities, yes.
And the knight could go to h5, or it could be a sacrifice on d5.
Yeah.
There's open h file.
Yeah, I like the dynamism for white, so I love playing this as white.
Black has to be pretty careful.
Yeah.
This is certainly a dangerous line.
Yeah, it's a nice gambit. So, and I'm surprised they don't play that more at the high levels. So usually white takes on e7 though.
Yes, usually you take on e7, and queen takes e7, and now knight b5 is certainly possible. When black normally plays knight b6, and white will play c3 in the...
Are you sure knight b5 seems a bit of a waste of time though? Does it go back to a3 then?
Yeah, it goes back to a3 and c2. But I think maybe this is not played so much these days. But this is certainly... Or just f4 knight c3 stuff.
Yeah, it's starting to look like that other variation we had a look at earlier. If say c5...
Well, c5 allows knight b5.
Oh, c5, yes, knight b5, yeah. Black has to be very careful about knight b5s in lots of variations.
And there are some lines where black louses and takes on d4 and the queen goes sailing in, but here I don't think you should allow it, I believe.
So yeah, maybe okay, so bishop e7 or h4. Any other moves here to look at?
Retreating the bishop is just generally not thought of as being any good. It's probably playable.
This runs into c5. c5 looks such a natural undermining.
It's logical to swap of the bishops. That's black's good bishop, and you weaken the dark squares. So why not swap it off? Why not?
Yes.
So you take on e7.
Yeah.
Queen takes. And white should be a little better, but black is solid and can play on the queen side.
Yeah.
Of course, the knight after bishop g, after e,
bishop g5,
bishop e7,
yeah,
e5. There are other moves. Knight e4 is better than it was in the previous variation, but still not very good. White should take on e7 and on e4.
And then probably shut down queen b4 check by playing c3?
No, queen e2 is actually a better move.
Certainly not bishop c4 here. Check.
No,
would win
bishop
the
c4 is very bad. Queen
e2.
Queen e2. Now queen b4 check.
c3.
It's a complete waste of time.
Protecting
both pawns. And now the e pawn's in some trouble, so I think black has to play b6. And if white takes on e4, then queen b4 comes and mayhem ensues. So white should just castle queenside instead. And black can defend the pawn, but white is better.
Right. Interesting. So that's in that line, bishop g5.
And there's one more square for the knight after bishop e7, e5, which is a move I've played, which is knight g8.
A very provocative retreat.
Which is not as bad as it looks. If white now takes on e7, then you can recapture with the knight.
And you get that beautiful f5.
In the f5 squares.
Right.
Black is closer to castling.
Well, mind you, there is a bishop to chop off the knight.
The bishop can, but it's an interesting way of playing it. White doesn't, of course, always take... Bishop e3 is also a move. Instead of bishop takes e7.
Oh, sorry, instead of bishop takes e7, bishop
h4 is also...
oh yeah, trying the Alekhine Chatard again.
It's for reasons I can't quite remember offhand.
Maybe f6 immediately.
No, black can take it here.
Right.
This is seen as being not as good as the actual Alekhine Chatard.
Right.
Though I forget the exact
well, I think
reasons.
because the knight can still reroute to f5, whilst if it was on d7, getting to f5 is a lot trickier. There's two routes to f5 here still available.
I think it's principally the knight's not getting in the way on d7, and black can actually get his king to the queen side quicker. But bishop d7 and knight c6 and castles. But this is not thought of as being particularly good.
Yeah.
But the bishop can retreat to e3 instead, which is certainly a line I've played this a few times. It's black. And the line I like for black is b6 here, to swap off the bad bishop. And now I like position after queen g4, when I think the only fine move is bishop f8.
This looks like a Bronstein system, which Bronstein used to do stuff like this in the French, putting bishops back, just trying to swap off the lights bed.
And now black has all his pieces on the back row on move 7.
If you can get rid of these bishops, then f5 is even juicier, isn't it, here? And tempo doesn't really mean that much.
Well, white's pieces are slightly misplaced. So there's no break with c4, for example.
Yes, it's gone because the knight's blocking it.
The bishop's not doing all that much on e3.
Yeah.
The pawn's now defended on g7, so the queen is somewhat exposed.
And the queen's a tempo target.
But then again, white's probably slightly better here.
Right.
Of course, if bishop g5, then you just play queen d7.
Right. Bishop g5, queen d7. Yeah.
And then on with the plan of bishop a6.
Bishop a6. Just so really, you want to weaken these light squares even further with this light square bishop exchange here. and you've got lovely post potentially for your knights later. F5, C4, E4 maybe.
Well, it'd be good to get the knight to E4. You never know. It's not impossible.
Yeah, so that's really cool stuff positionally. So these variations are all much more positionally orientated than Sicilian. This is all a lot about more ideas, isn't it? And swapping off bishops and getting control of squares.
Well, it's more slightly because the game hasn't opened up at such an early stage.
But there is now this idea for black not to go in for this by playing D takes E4 here, which is what I like to play in French.
D takes E4, which is the burn variation.
Yeah.
Which is very, very solid, but white should be a bit better. White should just take on E4, I think.
And now I think I'm going wrong, really. Well, it's more controversial to this, although Nigel Short used this line as well in the recent Gibraltar. To accept the double pawns is dynamic, but a bit risky, isn't it? You shouldn't really accept the double pawns.
You can just play bishop takes F6.
Yeah.
But you'll be hard pushed to win this with the black pieces.
Why do you think that is? Because white plays... What does white play here?
Because white can just get a very safe, solid position with no risk. Well, white can just take and play knight F3 and moves like this. C3 and bishop D3. So
do you think this is actually a good blitz chess option? There's many people watching each other that do enjoy blitz online. So G takes might be a good blitz option.
Certainly it's more double-edged.
Because you get G-file
risky
pressure, and sometimes you can put the bishop on the diagonal to coordinate with the rook on G8 later, and sometimes you can castle queenside. But it is double-edged, yeah, as you say.
I mean, you had some trouble with Mr. Fernandez.
Yes, that was a horrible hack, and you beat him in that. You crushed him in that tournament after.
I didn't actually crush him, but I beat him anyway.
I thought it was quite crushing. But no, I against top players, I'm often losing with this. I'm not really sure this should be in my repertoire when playing against an FM or an IM, definitely. And Nigel Short in the sim where I played this line, I was attracted to play it. But there is an idea here of playing A6 Morozevich line, which maybe we should mention. Actually, they don't play knight takes; they play bishop takes anyway, don't they?
Yes.
They give up. So why do you think that is, giving up the bishop rather than knight takes? Is not that good, is it? Because
bishop takes is very solid in response.
Oh right. And there's a big difference there from bishop takes here.
And after bishop takes, well, we play knight F3.
Oh, you just leave the knight. That's the nuance. You leave the knight on E4 to be a nuisance.
It's a good knight.
Oh right, so that's why they play bishop. Is that one of the main reasons?
I think so. Yes.
Oh, one of the mysteries unravelled, subtleties.
It's also what to play knight BD7 instead of bishop E7.
So knight BD7. Yes, this is a viable alternative, isn't it?
I think I've seen black playing this and avoiding the doubled pawns.
Right. Yes. And then, in fact, later, if white allows, this exchange, then maybe bishop D7 to C6 later to sort out the bishop.
It's quite possible.
So D takes E4 is quite popular, isn't it?
It's quite popular. It was. I'm not sure it's particularly good, but it's certainly a way of playing it. It's less theoretical than bishop E7.
Yeah. So bishop E7, you need to know your stuff a lot more. Yes.
Another alternative, of course, of black after bishop G5 is bishop B4, which is the McCutcheon French.
Oh yes. So now we have E5 and often H6 in response.
And after E5 is certainly the main move, and after H6 the bishop retreats to D2.
Now if it doesn't, say white takes, then takes, this is okay for black, isn't it? It looks a bit...
It looks slightly alarming, but that pawn's going to be rounded up. And now if white plays queen H5, then simply queen F6 is fine.
Yeah, you don't play this, because then check... There's bishop F8.
Bishop F8, but you still don't play it.
Yeah, no, queen F6.
And also you're hitting D4.
Yeah, so say castles. Though you can take on C3 here as well. This is no good.
You can anticipate your pieces, and that pawn is not going anywhere.
Yeah. So usually white retreats the bishop here
to d2.
to d2. I think e2 is in Watson's book, Dangerous Weapon, bishop e3, but d2 is the more common.
And now takes on c3, and white takes with the pawn.
Oh, sorry. If he takes with the bishop, that's rarer, isn't it?
I remember Fischer played that against Petrosian and lost. I think after knight e4 he played bishop a5.
Oh,
rather bizarrely.
It's a bit artificial, isn't it?
A very strange looking move. So taking with the pawn is better.
And then knight e4.
Knight e4, and now bishop d3.
Yeah.
Or do you play queen g4 first? I think, don't you? Queen g4 hitting g7, then after g6, then bishop d3, and white's king comes into the centre, but it should be okay there. So knight takes d2, king takes.
Yeah, queen. You can always take off the queen now. Yeah.
But that's not so good because black tends to lose a pawn because of move g4, fixing, and then knight f3 and chop on g5.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's not generally a good idea. So knight takes d2, king takes c5. No, if white plays bishop takes g6 here, then rook g8 avoids all nastiness.
Yeah.
And wins a piece for not enough.
Yeah.
So knight f3, knight c6, and a complex game ensues.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes black does play c4, but it depends on the positions. Even though it's controversial sometimes because you release the central tension, but sometimes it might be justified to make sure the attack.
I think c4 may give white too much free hand on the king side.
Yeah, usually it does. Yeah.
Normally that play something like queen e7, bishop d7, and keep the option of opening the position up with c takes d4.
Yeah.
Because that king could become slightly exposed on d2.
Yeah.
And white may push his h pawn, maybe his g pawn, play the queen to f4, may put rook on the b file.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, complex game will ensue.
So where are we? So we're going back to.
I think we've done all the classical.
Some of the main classical. Okay. Okay, so
You got any more classical? Should we move on to the Winawer?
Okay, so after knight c3, instead of knight f6, bishop b4. Now this was in the 60s, wasn't it? Mikhail Botvinnik was doing a lot of work on the Winawer.
Well, it was invented by Simon Winawer in the late 19th century.
Yes.
And it's more challenging than the knight f6. Black is prepared to give up his good bishop to weaken the white pawns, and this could cause problems for him later. But the pawn weaknesses could also cause problems for white on the c file.
Yes, I don't know. I sort of goes out of consideration. I'm always sort of routinely playing knight f6. I should really give the Winawer more of a shot. It's very, very interesting.
But there are some highly theoretical lines.
Yeah.
If white plays the aggressive line, then black has to have something ready.
So e5 is the most common move, isn't it?
E5 is certainly the main move, and c5 in response.
And then white invites positively black to double the pawns.
White generally plays a3 here.
Now white wouldn't do that in, say, Nimzo Indian, but white is keen to do that here. It's more critical because the bishop's been blocked in, hasn't it, by its own pawn on the retreat with that last move. So maybe this is why the kicking move is quite logical as well.
I mean, bishop a5 was quite popular at one time, but I think it's gone out of fashion.
Yes, Alex used to play this as a surprise weapon. I think there's ways for white to handle this.
I think it's generally seen as being quite good for white now. So black normally takes on c3.
Yeah.
And white recaptures. And white can play this in two ways. White can play positionally or aggressively. So after, say, queen c7, if white can play positionally with knight f3 and put his bishop on d3 and castle king side, and maybe trying to get his bishop to the a3 square, pressurising that diagonal.
That's a common Fischer plan, I noticed.
Yeah, that's how Fischer used to play it, and he scored very, very well with it. He actually did he say that the Winawer was positionally unsound, and he tried to prove it in his games.
But I think he did lose to the French defence more than other openings. Generally, the French defence caused him some trouble.
I don't know, did it?
I thought it did. Yeah. Oh, maybe that was earlier in his career, anyway.
But the other line White can play is very aggressive, lead with Queen G4.
Yeah, accepting a kind of gambit from Black, going into a... if Black wants a gambit, but Black can play F5 here.
I think F5 is possible, but the fun line is with Knight E7, whereby White takes on G7, Rook G8, Queen takes H7, C takes D4. And now C3 is on prise with the Rook. So White has to play either King D1, which is not very fashionable, or more commonly Knight E2.
I remember loads of theory on this.
And this is the Winawer gambit, and Black now takes on C3, and White generally plays his Queen back to D3 when he'll pick up the pawn on C3.
Yeah.
And he'll be a pawn up with the two bishops and a passed pawn on the H file.
Yeah.
But Black can get very dangerous play.
Yeah, say Knight C6, F4.
F4, Bishop D7.
Yeah.
And you can take on C3 with either the Queen or the Knight.
Yeah. So much theory you need to know on this. It carries on and on, doesn't it?
If you don't know this is to be avoided with either colour.
Maybe this is why I like Knight F6 classical.
It's a bit like the Yugoslav attacking the dragon. You have to actually know what you're doing to attempt to play this.
Yeah.
There are certain openings you can get away with not knowing a great deal of theory. This line is not one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, because White is giving Black a lot of development and pressure, potentially.
But after Queen G4, Black can avoid it if he doesn't want to play this line. As you said, Queen G4, F5. Also, King F8 is played, though I think possibly King F8 is actually played after Knight E7 rather than Queen C7, which can be similar. Of course, if Black plays Knight E7, Queen G4, Queen C7 transposes.
King F8 here.
But King F8 here is... I don't really like the look of it very much. I like the move here, Queen D1, abandoning this idea. And now you just go back to the positional formation with Knight F3 and Bishop D3 when the Black King is on a rather foolish square. That's a simple way to play it.
Right, so Knight E7's got some perks for being less theoretically trodden than Queen C7.
Well, after Queen G4, Queen C7 transposes.
Yeah.
But, also, castling is possible. But again, this is...
it's usually a bit dangerous with this pawn chain. White usually has lots of options for attack.
It's just pretty theoretical.
But Bishop H6 immediately doesn't really do much. Knight F5.
Knight F5 and Knight G6 as well.
Yeah.
It's not quite as simple as that.
No.
And there's a lot of theory here as well. The Winawer is basically a highly theoretical opening. But I've played the lines with B6 and Queen E7 myself. So after Bishop takes C3 takes without the pawn on C5. So actually going back after E5, Queen D7 or B6. And now if Queen G4, Bishop F8 is possible again.
I'm pretty sure Bronstein's played this cheeky system. It sort of seems to be rule breaking for development, but there's no targets really for White.
No, again, Black is solid. So, you can play B6 and against other moves, you can play Queen D7 next move.
So B6 just avoids a lot of theory, doesn't it? B6.
In order to meet Queen G4 with F5.
Yeah. Queen G4 here can be met with
Bishop F8, but in this position,
Bishop F8, yeah.
Yeah, but in other lines, after say Bishop D2,
right,
you can play say, Queen D7 to beat Queen G4 with F5.
Oh right. Yes, F5. That lateral protection of G7 is useful. So basically, that's a bit of a rare alternative, though. If we go back, so if we go to that Winawer, yeah, you really need, there's books on it. There's like devoted to it, isn't there? Really,
it is very complex. But I mean, there are alternative moves, aren't there? After Bishop B4.
Sorry, if we go back to Bishop B4, yep. So I've managed to lose where we are. So Knight C3, Bishop B4.
White has various alternatives. E takes D5 is possible here. The International Master Peter Large played this, I seem to remember. Bishop D3. With the idea of playing an exchange variation where black may not want to swap off his bishop, though he normally does.
Right.
And maybe you can utilise the dark squares.
Oh yes, Adams beat him in this in Boys Black Masters. I had a game I video annotated.
Adams was black, was he?
Yeah.
It's an interesting offbeat line. There are several alternatives. Instead of E takes D5, Knight G2 is rather out of fashion. Trying to preserve the two bishops without doubling the pawns.
It's the Alekhine Gambit, isn't it? So D takes, then you play A3.
And it depends. Black can try and take the pawn, which is not very good. Bishop takes C3, Knight takes C3, F5.
Oh, it's looking
F3.
awesome. For white.
I wouldn't play this.
I would like White's position here. Lots of dynamic play.
Yeah, I wouldn't play this. So Bishop E7 is a normal move. And now White takes on E4, and Black can play Knight F6 or Knight C6. And I think this is not seen as being a big problem for Black these days. It's not very often played.
Good surprise weapon.
There's lots of moves here. Bishop D2 was once quite popular.
Timman, wasn't Timman playing this?
I don't know. And after D takes E4,
maybe not here.
Queen G4 hitting G7. And we carry on with Knight F6, Queen takes, Rook G8, Queen H6, and now Black shouldn't take on D4 unless he's feeling very brave. But maybe just Rook G6 and then, or maybe it's just a move like B6. Is that a move, or might play Knight takes E4 now?
I'm wondering, yes.
No, I think no. I think that's not a problem. I think these lines are generally not a big problem.
Yeah. So yes.
Yet another possible move is Queen D3, which was in vogue a few years ago.
Queen D3
seems to have disappeared from practice for some reason. And the main idea of this is after D takes E4, you take with the Queen, and if Knight F6, then the Queen switches to H4.
All right, yes, looks like crude intentions.
I remember Hebden playing this, and Black wouldn't want to swap that bishop now with a potential pin coming.
Yeah, on F6 that would be pretty nasty, unchallenged.
This isn't played so much these days. I'm not sure what happened to it, but
it's a bit of a rare bird, isn't it?
It does seem to have
Queen D3
slipped away after brief popularity. A3 is yet another line similar to the Bishop D2 line, which I'll briefly mention, and Black can take on C3 and then play D takes E4, and we go Queen G4 again, Knight F6, and similar, except the bishop's been swapped off, takes Rook G8, Queen H6, and so on. Another unbalanced game, but again not seen as a big problem.
So it's trying to exploit Black's G7, isn't it? All these, because the bishop has that kind of weakness of the last move, is leaving that G7 sort of a bit vulnerable in these lines.
Yeah. So White has lots of options, but E5 is the best move.
Yeah.
And White should
Now,
stick to
some
it.
fourth move alternatives instead of C5. So we've touched them already. You don't have to play C5. You can play knight E7, or you can play B6.
B6 I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Knight 7 may transpose if black plays C5 later.
Pardon me?
Knight E7 may transpose if black plays C5 later. I think here white has a
Right.
chance of playing bishop D2. Bishop D2 is possible with the idea of playing knight C to E2.
Oh, right, yes.
And he swap off the black bishop and then bolster his pawns on the dark squares.
Right.
It's certainly another way of
So, for
playing
example, like this. Yeah. Maybe even C3.
it. Yeah, C3
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah. So yeah, there are dedicated books on these. We're only really just only briefly touching the surface of these main named variations here. There are several books you can get on.
Yeah. Another move here which is not very good is knight C6, which is similar to the Guimard, which we'll look at later. The Guimard is often 3 knight D2.
Right.
But this is actually not very good here.
Right.
Because the D pawn is securely defended,
Yeah.
and white can just carry on with knight F3,
Right.
and the Guimard ideas tend not to work. So this is better for white.
Right.
But we'll look at the Guimard later anyway.
So knight C3 has a lot of territory to it. The other main system, when D5 is played, well, there's which we touched on before.
Well, we haven't looked at the Rubinstein,
Okay.
which is D takes E4 on move 3, which is similar to the Burn, but it's not quite the same.
Right. So knight C3.
Black takes on E4,
Right.
and knight takes E4, and of course knight F6 could transpose,
Into the burn. Yeah.
but black has other possibilities. Black can play knight D7 first.
Oh, isn't this Fort Knox territory? Was it?
Well, the Fort Knox we'll look at in a second.
All right.
And now you play knight F6 without doubling the pawns.
Right.
Of course, white has more space and a freer game. But of course, bishop D7 I think is Fort Knox, isn't it? Instead of knight D7.
Ah.
Am I right? This is a Fort Knox?
I'm not 100% sure. It might transpose anyway. So you sort of end up trying to take here and then close up.
Basically, you play your black bishop out to C6.
Yeah.
You swap it off for a knight.
On either there or there.
On
sometimes.
E4 or sometimes F3.
Yeah.
Then play C6.
Yes.
With a very solid Caro-Kann structure.
Yeah.
And you know, just have a solid game. And not hope too much for a win.
Yeah.
Just keep it very solid and ask white what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for white to break through, which is why it's called the Fort Knox.
Yeah.
It's an unambitious way to play it, but if you want to draw, it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. So.
Have we got any other lines in knight C3?
Any other deviations? If well, after knight C3, that I can think of. I can't think of any. Well, there's waiting moves maybe, which more in the Tarrasch. In the Tarrasch, there's a variety of waiting moves like A6 and H6, but not so much against knight C3, are they? You can't play that.
Well, you can, but it doesn't do anything.
It's not as effective. Why would you say that's not as effective?
Well, I mean,
the Tarrasch.
The purpose of playing A6 is to stop bishop B5 check.
Yes.
Which you're not going to play against knight C3. It's a completely different line. The idea of A6 is you're going to play C5, and you want to avoid bishop B5 checks.
Yes.
With a knight on C3, and you're not going to play C5. After A6, knight F3, you're not going to play C5.
Would that be really bad? Because there's pressure on D5, isn't there? Extra pressure on D5.
It's just not very good.
Yeah, maybe just,
here it probably just loses a pawn.
yeah, maybe just taking. So yeah, so these waiting moves apply more for some reason to the Tarrasch because maybe that immediate pressure on d5.
Well, actually, it's a waiting move. It's a preparatory move.
But there's also like h6.
Yeah, but not here. But h6 is not.
Sorry.
Waiting.
I mean against knight d2. I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, against knight d2.
But it's a preparatory move. It's preparing c5, stopping bishop b5 check. It's not waiting.
Well, I call these waiting moves, these a6. Well, I think Watson refers to them as waiting moves. I think that you can just wait. You don't have to. There's a variety of moves here against knight
we
d2.
look later anyway.
Yeah.
One more I thought we should mention here is after knight c3. I just remembered is Marshall has played c5 here, which is not very good. But Marshall, likes to get a nice open game in his day. But I think White can just take on d5 and take on c5 as well.
Oh, that looks a bit dangerous.
But the d pawn is on prise.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe protect that first. Or okay, it's interesting. Yes.
But it's not thought highly of. c5 is not played, and with good reason. But I think we've covered the whole of knight c3 anyway, haven't we?
Very briefly, yes, very briefly. I should stress there are lots and lots of books on the French defence. We're only touching the surface of this video. What are the best authors for the French defence? Watson is a classic author. He did a classic work. There's other good authors and exponents of the French defence throughout history: Courchenoy, Ullmann, Short.
I would always say opening books by people who actually play the opening.
I'm not sure Courchenoy's written many books on the French, though. And Ullmann, has Ullmann written any books?
I have no idea. But my recommendation for buying books generally is if they don't play the opening, don't buy a book. Buy them on that opening. It's quite simple, really. Would you agree?
Sorry, if you don't play an opening, don't do a book. Or
now, if somebody authors a book on a particular opening and they don't play that opening themselves.
Yeah, well, there's Watson, but he's well regarded with his French defence book. But I'm not sure he's got loads of French defence games himself, has he?
I presume he has.
All right, maybe.
I've never looked it up. But that's just a general rule. If someone plays the opening, they're going to know more about it.
But sometimes, the practitioners are not the best, teachers. Otherwise, Ribka would be the best book writer, but Ribka can't, communicate ideas. You can't go by just FIDE ratings or.
I don't go by FIDE ratings at all. But if somebody's going to promote an opening, I expect them to play it.
Yeah.
This is my personal view.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't buy opening books anyway.
Yeah, it's more appropriate for us to be talking about the French defence because we play it more than the Sicilian at the moment. So that was a bit odd last week, wasn't it? Talking about Sicilian, but we're just covering like the named variations really. But the French defence, it's got a more positional feel to it, more about pawn structure, slower manoeuvring, squares, exchanging off pieces, keeping the tension or not keeping the tension. There are some violent gambit lines.
Particularly in the Winawer, which we looked at.
But the Winawer is one of the most theoretical openings ever, isn't it? Really.
Well, there's a lot to learn in the Winawer.
Shall we go on to the Tarrasch, or shall we?
Let's look at the Tarrasch. Why not?
Okay. So the Tarrasch is not inviting a pin at all. So one of the main perks, in fact, it's avoiding the pin, isn't it? The bishop b4 doesn't work at all now because of c3.
Yeah, bishop b4 is silly.
It's a silly move now.
So again, this stops the Winawer, and again the pawn is defended. Of course, d4 is now perhaps slightly weaker.
Yeah,
which is the one disadvantage.
Yeah. So now there are all sorts of what I call waiting moves: h6, a6, or even knight c6 is better than before, or even bishop e7. But the standard move is usually knight f6, isn't it?
Well, knight f6 and c5.
Oh, sorry, and c5.
The two main moves.
And there was a lot of battles between Karpov and Courchenoy, wasn't there, in this French defence line?
Also, we mentioned just briefly, black can play d takes e4 again, which will take us back into the lines we looked at earlier. It's the same with after knight takes c4, you reach an identical position we've already seen. Yes,
so it didn't really matter if the knight came via d2 or c3 if it's going to capture.
Which is why it's actually a useful line, because you can play it against knight c3 or knight d2, so it's less to learn.
That's a very, very good practical point there, that d takes e4. If you want to sort of do your Fort Knox line or whatever, you can do it against both.
But of course,
Neil MacDonald's got a book or something on Fort Knox, I think.
See,
Yeah.
of course, it's not black's most dynamic line,
No.
but it's good practical idea. Lessons the amount of theory you have to learn.
There's a very logical idea of just getting rid of your bishop and then playing c6. It's like very, very logical. But okay, so knight d2.
Okay, so we'll do the two main moves first, shall we? Knight f6 is the main idea, and now e5 is certainly the most common move. Again, knight e4 leads to something we've already seen. Again, white should take it.
Yes.
And play bishop c4.
That's exactly as we've covered that, haven't we?
We've covered that already, so no need to cover that again.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if the knight comes from d2 or c3. Yeah.
So e5, the knight's really got none of the squares. G8 is really pointless now with the knight on d2. So the knight should go to d7.
Why would you say it's pointless? More pointless here?
Because the white can shore up with c3 and white just play c3 and f4, etc.
Right. So yeah, really strengthening the dark square pawns. Yeah. So okay. So knight d2.
Knight d2, knight f6, e5, knight f d7, and now.
I used to like this move, c4. It's a bit of a surprise move. I saw that once in tournaments, but it's not by any means.
I've played that. It's not actually very good.
No, but it's kind of takes black out of the books more. But the usual moves here. There's loads of theory, isn't there, on this now? This Tarrasch.
Well, the two main moves are f4 and bishop d3. F4 is more dynamic and more risky, and now he plays c3, knight c6.
And now the maybe the surprising thing is you can put this knight. Well, you have the flexibility to put that knight there and that knight to come here.
Normally, knight df3 is the move played here, and.
So what? There is actually potentially a big issue with this one.
Well,
because of d4 being a bit vulnerable.
Well, I mean, yeah, but also the knight d2 is actually rather getting in the way now. Where is it going?
Yeah, it's getting in the way of d4 protection.
On e2, it can go to a square like g3 or even f4, possibly if it plays f5. I mean, if you look at the knights on f3 and d2, it's getting in the way of the bishop. It's just
it is in the way of a lot of things.
Admittedly, it gets in the way of the other bishop on e2, but white sometimes feeling shadows that. So knight df3 is the move here, and all sorts of fun can ensue. Black can play quietly with c takes d4 and knight b6, but generally black goes for more aggressive lines, which with queen b6 and knight e2, things like this, and moves like g5, f6, g5 come in, and all sorts of highly theoretical stuff.
I've had some fun with this. Yeah, you're trying to blow up literally white's pawn centre, undermining it from all potential undermining points. I know Nimzovich talks about undermining from the base of the pawn chain, but actually any part of the pawn chain, if it works, doesn't it? If you can undermine usefully.
Yeah. Well, white's some way from getting castled, and his king often goes to the f2 square.
Yeah, and often then g3 is sometimes used as
sometimes g3, and then you fianchetto the king, but the bishop's still on f1.
And sometimes it goes there first, h3 to attack e6. There's lots and lots of stuff there.
And black has, for example, often sacrifices a knight on e5 for a couple of pawns, and dynamic play. This is something again you have to actually know if you're going to play. Yeah, you can play more quietly with c takes d4 and knight b6. But this is highly charged stuff.
Yeah.
But I think white's more common option is to play bishop d3.
Against
not here, instead of f4, which is safer. And the main line goes c5, c3, knight c6, knight e2, takes on d4, c takes d4, f6, e takes, knight takes, castles, bishop d6, knight f3. And we have essentially white has an isolated d pawn, black has backward e pawn, black has open f file, white has an open e file.
Yes.
The bishop on c8 is bad, but often it reroutes via d7, e8, h5.
Yes, after casting, yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting possibilities. It's interesting.
So queen c7s are interesting. I mean, Korchnoi played stuff like this, h6, g5, and queen g7 later. You sometimes get ideas like that. But often, also for white's often playing bishop g5 to reroute the bishop here, isn't it? To exchange off
G3,
this. Because if you can weaken these dark squares and just bind black to protecting e6, that would be miserable, wouldn't it? Be like, like in the Dutch Stonewall, trying to get rid of the better bishop of black and force black to be miserable, protecting e6.
But black can, of course, counter this. And black can sometimes play e5, only the centre.
Yeah. Sometimes that really is effectual. And sometimes when the rook moves, there's tactics on f2 sometimes.
F2 can become weak in this line, yes.
in either the diagonals or the coordination of that diagonal in here in conjunction with a piece sack sometimes.
Yes, Simon Williams is an expert on this line. I think he's an expert on the whole of the French, actually. But I've certainly seen him...
He's got some good videos, I think.
Yeah. Much longer than ours is going to be.
And on specific variations. So this is just the bunny's guide really to the French fairs. Please note there are lots of GMs etc. done dedicated videos, books on specific variations.
But it's a good overview. Also, going back, there's after f6, there's the fun with knight f4, isn't there? When all sorts of exciting things can happen.
Yes, introducing the possibility for a quick queen h5.
A line here is knight takes d4, queen h5, king e7, knight g6 check, takes, e takes f6, e takes f6.
Oh, sorry. Oh. E takes f6 check.
Yeah,
yes.
knight takes f6, queen takes h8, and black plays king f7 here. And again, this is pretty hairy stuff.
Yeah.
That you have to actually
know
what you're doing if you're going to play this.
Yeah.
But I think black has good compensation, even though it may not actually look like it.
Yeah.
But
white doesn't want to play knight f3 here.
Don't move your knight. Your queen will vanish. So that's another. See, there are many really dynamic lines in the French, just as there are in the Sicilian. I mean, there are solid positional lines, but there are lines which are really
hairy, yeah,
as well.
So this knight f4, very aggressive, but not usual. The usual is just taking on f6, because really it's trying to encourage this e-file pressure on the backward pawn later.
White's trying to get a slight advantage
on the structure, based on the structure, and to exchange off strategically the dark square bishops later.
Yes, if he can.
Black, by contrast, is trying to liberate this pawn, this bishop, and maybe make use of the dynamic factors in the position later.
He doesn't always want to play e5, because e5 removes white's isolated pawn and leaves black with an isolated pawn.
Yes,
but it is a possibility.
It's a dynamic option later.
To be borne in mind, though.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily what black is actually aiming for.
Yeah.
He may just end up a bit worse.
Yeah.
Depends on the position.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other, I think we've done knight f6, haven't we?
So
the other main move is c5. And I think that this has slightly put knight d2 out of popularity as an aggressive try for white, because I think that knight c3 seems more aggressive. It's slightly more in vogue, I think. I don't know. But generally white would take on d5 here. But
Adams is a specialist in the Tarrasch. He scores so well. He should write a book on it, shouldn't he? Yeah, that's your argument about the practitioner writing the books. If there's anyone to write a book on this from the white perspective,
Adams has done very well with this. And black can retake with either the queen or the pawn. The pawn. And so now white has various moves. Knight f3 is logical, so it's bishop b5 check. And black can interpose with the bishop or the knight, I believe. And white should be slightly better in all these lines, but black has a very free game. Korchnoi played this line a lot,
but it did cost him. No, that was the first tough match, wasn't it? Where he was almost doing very well, or not? Was he wiped out in one match versus Karpov?
Well, this was in the World Championship match where he was playing this, to draw with black.
It's very hard against Karpov.
But he's played it against weaker players and beaten many of them.
Karpov is like Adams in style, isn't he? They're both positional. They're going to minimise counterplay. So I think they love this kind of thing to shut down counterplay. There's a lot of dynamism Black's trying to generate.
But this is how Tarrasch would have played against the Tarrasch. Just free and easy development of all Black's pieces. Okay, there's an isolated d-pawn, but all your pieces have squares to go to.
It's funny you say that. Tarrasch would play against Tarrasch. So, but he did invent knight d2 against the French. He popularised knight d2.
I have no idea if he was the first to ever play it, but he was certainly the guy who brought it into vogue. Secret Tarrasch, yes. Okay, so let's look at queen takes d5 briefly.
So it avoids the structural issue with the isolated queen's pawn, but it loses some development.
Now that the queen is hanging around the middle of the board, black maintains a more solid structure. Knight gf3 is the main move here.
There's a temporary pawn sacrifice.
Temporary pawn sacrifice. Black shouldn't try and keep it. Bishop c4, hitting the queen. It drops back d6, and white now castles. And again, you shouldn't try and keep the pawn. So knight f6, knight b3, knight c6, knight takes d4, knight b6.
It's the b knight, isn't it? Though?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And knight takes d4. And now white can take with the queen.
It's a bit dull, isn't it?
To try to go to a slightly better ending.
Dull. Yeah. There's a 3-2 pawn majority to try and exploit an ending.
I think generally white's failed to get a lot out of this, even though it looks quite promising. I think sometimes black can park his king on e7. That's one advantage.
Right.
And his king's closer to the action, whereas white king's on g1.
So the more ambitious tries knight takes d4.
Knight takes d4. And now black has various moves. Queen c7 is a move, and a6 is also a move. And I think bishop d7 is played as well. And white has some attacking chances, but black is solid. Has solid pawn structure. And black can play dynamically and cast on the queen side, which is slightly risky. Or he can just cast on the king side and play in the centre.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to look at some of your sidelines now?
Well, actually, I've got this wiki on the right as a reference as well, just in case we needed it. But you've plotted a fantastic structure there, Paul, if I might say. But let's see. In the Tarrasch variation after ED, so we've got ED, which they mention as Karpov Korchnoi battles in 1974 match. So black was getting the isolated queen's pawn. Queen takes d5, which we've just touched on just now. Okay. Knight c6 is the Winawer variation.
No, not
no.
Here.
Sorry, not here. Pardon me.
No,
Pardon me. Knight d2. After knight d2, sorry. Knight c6. But no, we haven't finished with other alternatives. So.
Well, we've looked at c5 and knight f6 are two main moves.
All right, now we're going to look at so we might as well go on to the Winawer.
Yeah, the Winawer. Why not? Named after Carlos Winawer, who I believe is Argentinian.
Right.
I'm not sure about that.
Carlos, yes, sounds Argentinian. So say knight here, e5, knight fd7. So black's not undermining from the base of the pawn chain, but usually playing f6.
Black plan is to play f6 and try and get e5 in, rather than playing c5.
Yeah.
The thing is, black would end up, if he doesn't get e5, and he would have a lot position which is a lot worse. So he does actually need to generate play, dynamic play fairly quickly.
Sometimes this was great fun. I did play it in Blitz in the past. You get a lot of fun with playing for e5 later and the f file, and you can all the pieces can spring into life dynamically. That can be great fun for Blitz. This knight c6, right? It's a prize weapon, isn't it? Because anything outside of the two main moves is taking the opponent, most opponents, well out of their book zone, isn't it?
But people know the Guimard these days. It's not so uncommon.
They do, don't they? Yeah, that's a shame. But there are other waiting moves anyway. Bishop e7 is my pet favourite at the moment. So same with Alex. Bishop e7.
But Bishop b5, for example, is possible here as an anti-Guimard counter.
Oh dear! And you're not inventing an anti-Guimard, are you? Oh dear! Poor dynamic players, crushed. No counterplay.
and you can consider taking on c6. If you take on e4, take on c6. It's possible. Lots of weak pawns. Who knows?
Yes.
But that bishop on c8 could become quite strong.
Yes. Yeah. Here it might be even possible to play bishop a6. Not 100% sure of this position.
No, it's interesting. Anyway, after knight c6, another move we should mention after knight c6 in the Guimard is simply c3. Bishop's on f1.
Sorry.
When black can actually blast the position open with e5.
Yes, this is quite painful, I think, for white. I've had difficult positions in this.
I'm not sure it's actually. I think white's perfectly okay.
Really, I think black's got very useful tension here. This knight's kind of more aggressively placed than this knight.
But again, you're going to gain a tempo on the queen in a minute.
I think this is uncomfortable for white. I wonder. I don't really want to turn on an engine, but I don't particularly like this c3 move because of e5 being quite powerful.
No, it's not as powerful as you think. It's okay for white, but knight f3 is certainly the main move.
Knight f3, yeah. It shuts down e5. Knight f3 is very annoying in the d4 openings to shut down the Albion counter gambit, and here it's shutting down e5 as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And another point about after knight f6. If white plays bishop d3, then black can play knight b4, hitting the bishop, which is needed to defend the pawn on e4.
Annoying.
Yeah. So generally white does play 5e5. And after knight fd7, well, bishop e2 is a move. Bishop b5 is a move as well.
But not bishop d3 probably, because of knight b4.
Well, bishop d3 is probably playable.
Asking for knight b4s and c5s.
Then bishop goes back to e2.
Yeah, but then black's getting in the c5, and if the knight gets kicked, then knight c6.
Yeah, it's a line though.
All right.
That's wasted a bit of time.
Yeah. So Guimard.
And knight b3 is, I believe, another move. Clamping down on c5, so also freeing the bishop on c1.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Interesting line, the Guimard.
Yeah.
But I mean, it actually goes against the general French principle that you're going to play c5, which black does in most lines of French. Black immediately blocks the c pawn with a knight.
Yes. Yes, that is.
So it's unusual.
It is, yeah.
And quite possibly it's not very good. But white has to know his stuff again.
Yeah. I like these deviations. Now, bishop e7 is what me and Alex love at the moment. I think
Rubinstein, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Morozevich as well has played this, I think, or is it something else who's played Morozevich? Wouldn't be surprised if it's Morozevich as well. But one of the ideas is basically if you encourage white to play knight f3, so sometimes if they do play e5, then they haven't got you've cut out the f4 move. You've encouraged them to block their own.
Well, white can't play. There's blocked f. Also, the knights on d2 and e2 with the queen's knight going to f3. Basically, it's a kind of it is a waiting move because now to knight f3. If white plays structures with e5, his knights are on slightly awkward squares.
Yeah. And you get this bishop e7 as a waiting move across a different opening altogether. The queen's gambit declined. You see bishop e7. It's quite a sort of cheeky little waiting move, isn't it? In different openings.
Yes, a way of stopping bishop g5 in the queen's gambit.
Yeah.
and it doesn't stop bishop g5 because black normally plays knight f6, but it cuts down white's options.
And it's useful
because he can't play the line with the knight on f3 and the knight on e2.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? That's such a simple move. And they say knights before bishops, but here's an exception. Clearly, if you want to stumble the opponent into get a good line, bishops before knights sometimes.
Well, I don't think you would claim that bishop 7 is actually better than knight f6. That's debatable. But
yeah, knight f6
it has a viable idea behind it.
Well, but it was Tarrasch that coined that idea of knight. He made all those little phrases, didn't he? Tarrasch, like knights before bishops. All those rules he sort of created. Yeah.
I don't think he created them, but he certainly had a lot of opinions, and he wasn't afraid to expound them.
Yeah.
Right. Another move is a6, which is a preparation for c5, and it just cuts out bishop b5 checks.
Yeah.
I suppose the logic is that if you're going to go to the Tarrasch and black's going into the Tarrasch line with c5, e takes d5, e takes d5. You don't want to take that with the queen. Black stop at bishop b5 to keep more pieces on the board, so that he's further away from a slightly worse endgame.
Yeah. And
more pieces on the board, more dynamism.
Yeah.
But it is a bit slow.
Yeah.
But it has been played by respectable players.
Yeah. Also, I mean, h6 is the most outrageous, and Aronian in the London Classic was saying the pressure's now on white, because if he doesn't win, he'll be really mocked and humiliated after the game, or something to that effect. Anyway, the pressure's on white here to win after h6. But I did use it successfully in the London Classic, but I did have a dodgy position because Nigel Short had beaten Adams with it in the recent Classic,
with
2011, December 2011. Yeah.
I'm not sure why white can't just get on with it and play a natural move like bishop d3.
It's one of the more outrageous moves, I think.
It doesn't seem to have any great purpose there, honestly.
It stops bishop g5s in some lines.
But the knight's on d2.
Yes, that is a point. That
I'm not convinced that h6 is a very good move.
So knight d2, yeah. But these are dangerous weapons. They're dangerous because you're really taking the opponent. If the opponent you're forcing them to improvise, then they're going to take more time on the clock. They might not play as accurately as the known plans. There's a lot of advantages in getting the opponent on their own resources.
Personally, I would stick with c5 and knight f6. But it's each to his own.
If we go back, actually, there's a very important move, second move, which is not d4, which is what Swanson beat me with recently, d3, the King's Indian attack, which you can play against a variety of things as well. Should we mention that?
Should we just carry on with third move alternatives after d4? Do all the d4 stuff first, really.
Okay.
So, we don't. E takes d5 we should look at briefly.
Oh yes, the exchange variation.
And now...
a very popular online to just take the pawn. And
queen takes pawn as played by my friend here is not a very good move. I have to be honest. It's a bad version of the centre counter.
I got the idea from seeing Godley from another YouTube's Kindergarten channel. I had good fun with it anyway in blue. It's breaking the symmetry. Opponents are on their own resources. I've had good results with it.
Why can display natural moves?
But if white does play knight c3, then sometimes they without the c4 break, you can get a solid position here if white's not careful. So
yes, I mean, but it's not especially good. So I would say e takes d5 is better.
Yeah.
This is interesting because you can say it as a drawing attempt, but somebody once said to me that white was in the form of positional zugzwang here, because whatever white does, black can react in a different way. Black can break the symmetry.
All right, let's test that then.
So
knight f3.
Knight f3, now black can play bishop g4.
Bishop g4. Yes, that is interesting.
That's one way of playing. If white plays 4 bishop d3, then black can play knight c6, and if now knight e2, depending upon, then bishop g4 again comes in. So So that's another. What else can I do?
So you might have the idea of casting queenside,
and black can maybe cast queenside, and a double-edged game can ensue. Of course, C4 is a more dynamic try. This is more of a winning attempt, and Kasparov has played this, hasn't he? A couple of times. Kasparov trying to win with the exchange French.
Yes, that sounds odd, doesn't it?
I do wonder what his grandmaster opponent, whoever it was, thought the first time he played E takes D5. He thought, is Kasparov playing for a draw? Interesting. But then C4, no, he isn't. And of course, this is immediately unbalancing position. Another possibility is for black to just place a very quick C5 against whatever white does, but black doesn't really need to, because knight F3 can be met by bishop G4 and bishop D3 by knight C6.
So this pin, I mean, so say white did play bishop D3, how would you carry on here with black?
Well, bishop D6.
Say castles,
knight E7,
and you've got a good position here with black. Now say H3, could you even try sacking the bishop, or you put the bishop round here?
I'd say to H5.
Yeah, you exchange off this guy and try and weaken C4 and E4 and get a knight later, maybe rerouting to E4.
Possibly.
Yeah.
It still tends towards equality, but there's certainly a slight unbalancing. White generally doesn't play knight F3. It allows black to get straight in, with an aggressive pin.
What about this annoying H3? I think is that worth mentioning to stop the pin?
Not really.
What does black do? Just bishop D6.
Bishop D6.
Then waits for knight F3. He can always play knight E7 to have the knight in a different place if he wants.
Really, if white's best move is H3, then the exchange French can't be very good. So the exchange French, and black can unbalance it.
Bishop F4, is that another idea? You've always got counters, haven't you? Basically, you can
the bishop F4 could maybe be met by C5, possibly, with ideas of putting the queen on B6 later.
All right, to expose that bishop.
Maybe it's a bit risky.
Leaving B2, maybe, possibly. Okay.
I guess bishop F4 you can just play knight F6 or whatever you like.
So you think it shouldn't be a reason to be put off playing the French defence, this exchange line? You should just relish trying to unbalance it, probably. That's the best attitude, mentally.
Well, unless they're going for the C4 lines, it's unlikely that anyone who's trying to win the game will play the exchange French. So just think, okay, they're playing for a draw and try and beat them.
The advanced variation, should we move on to the advance on this?
We haven't looked at the advance, of course, have we? So let's look at the advance, which is a big...
It's the old-fashioned way of trying to refute the French, wasn't it? All the old masters were playing the advance, weren't they, for a long time?
Nimzovich certainly played the advance a lot. And here, the B6 is not very good. B6 is an alternate line, but it's not really very good. Because bishop A6 is not threatened. For example, knight F3... And now bishop A6 is not very good, because you take it, knight takes, and now C4.
Oh, you're trying to bust open the centre.
And queen A4 check is threatened, winning a piece.
Yes, unpleasant.
And black has a bad position.
Yeah.
So the B6 is a bit slow.
Yeah.
So really after E5, really black should play C5. And...
it's about the pawn chain here. It's all about pawn chain management, which is a lot of Nimzovich. My system revolves around pawn chains, undermining pawn chains, and this is a great opening for understanding, I think, pawn chains.
This is a classic pawn chain, and now knight C6 is the normal move, and white generally always plays knight F3. I have seen bishop E3 with the idea of putting the queen on D2, so if queen B6 you can just defend the pawn. But the problem is the knight on B1 is rather stuck. So I think knight F3 is better.
Yeah.
And now there are bishop D7 is possible, but queen B6 is a common line. And now white has two main moves. Bishop E2 is after which black can generally build up pressure on the D4 pawn. For example, one line.
Isn't it this Juve's waiting move bishop d7? Is that here? Over's waiting.
No, but bishop d7 is not actually particularly good here. After bishop d7, white actually gives up to centre with d takes c5.
Right.
And then after bishop takes c5, he castles. And now b4 is coming.
All right, and maybe even b5 later to try and take
and
away
bishop
control
e3 as well. Note, black's rather awkward here. Knight g7 loses a piece.
Oh, yeah.
So black's
ouch.
So it's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
So
not here, bishop d7.
So black should actually take on d4 here, and after takes, he can play knight either to e7 or h6, and.
But Akobian, Brusen Akobian has mentioned a plan of not blocking in, I think, this bishop idea. So you take immediately, and then without using this knight, then you play this.
Yeah, but black can play knight c3 and stop it.
That's a good point. Yeah. Maybe I'm slightly confusing the variations. I'm not entirely sure.
There is a line. Anyway, let's just go back to where we were anyway.
Yeah.
C5, c3, knight c6, knight f3, queen b6, bishop e2, takes, knight e7 or h6, and white can play knight a3 here. Yes,
because he's that bishop's temporarily blocked from a3, so this is actually quite cheeky to reinforce d4.
Reinforce d4. Oh, the old line, which is b3 instead of knight a3, when white's king gets displaced. So it's knight f5, bishop b2, bishop b4 check, king f1.
If black's not careful, white will have a free hand because he's got rid of that central tension. It can be quite dangerous, can't it, if black's got a free hand on the king side.
And Tarrasch and Nimzovich had some games in this line, I seem to remember. And this is not seen so much these days, but it's a way of playing it. More common for white, actually, going all the way back, is to play 6a3 after queen b6. And white's preparing b4 with a big clamp.
Yes, very annoying stuff, this a3 business.
And black normally reacts with c4, and the game moves on to positional grounds. Black spends a lot of time fiddling around with weak squares on a4 and b3. It's black has spent a lot of time playing knight a5, bishop d7, bishop b5, queen c6, bishop a4, moves like this.
Yeah.
Seems to take a long time, but seems to have done okay with it. Sometimes white breaks open b3 himself, especially if black's castled queenside. Black has the f6 break.
But sometimes that can be welcomed because you sometimes get your king, you move your king and try and use c4 as a square.
Sometimes white can get good play. Sometimes white even plays b3, black takes and white immediately plays c4,
right,
trying to bust open the position.
Yeah,
it's an interesting double-edged game. Probably the main line of the advance these days, I would think.
So queen b6, but any alternatives to queen b6?
Well, I think the line you're trying to look at with
the way to move is bishop d7?
Swap the bishop off, so black can play bishop d7 instead of knight c6.
Not bishop d7 here?
No. Well, you can play it here, but the line you're trying to look at...
Oh, right.
Is,
yes, the old trying to bishop swap line.
Yeah, but what thing is, white plays knight f3, queen b6...
Fischer Petrosian, a4?
No.
Was it? No?
No.
Trying to stop the bishop exchange by a confusing variation.
But that just weakens... the b4 square. I don't like a4.
You don't like a4, no?
But black's played natural moves, and that's a weakness.
Right.
So I don't like that. White just plays bishop e2 here, and after bishop b5.
Oh, c4 is the gambit?
c4. And after, say, bishop takes... There are various ways black can take the pawn. If say bishop takes, pawn takes, d5.
Yeah, this can be dangerous for black, huh?
And I don't like this for black.
Because sometimes this pawn can be rounded with a tempo. It's going to be, isn't it? But also this central, yeah.
White often gets a crushing attack quite quickly. I wouldn't play this as black.
Yeah. So this bishop b5 is rendered less potent because of this this gambit idea. Yeah.
It's too slow.
It's a bit too slow. Yeah.
Basically, it's trying to play positionally when the centre isn't blocked.
And if d takes, there's knight a3.
Yes, quite possibly, or maybe d5 again. I don't know, but or knight c3. I don't. This is not a line I would.
Yeah.
I would play. Thing is, black's played c5, which is a move towards opening up the game.
I think it might be here then. If the Jacobian idea, maybe it was here. C takes to sneak in bishop b5 without c4. Possibly it's here.
This is more sensible.
Yeah. So it avoids that gambit.
It's possible white can just play knight c3, nice simple move, takes, and he can probably take with the queen or the knight, and then just get on with it.
Yeah. But black has got rid of that bad bishop.
White has the advantage in development.
Yeah.
White gets the c file first, for example.
Right. It's dangerous for black still, yeah.
Is that a Copian or a
Jacobian, sorry.
Jacobian with a B?
Yes. Yeah, he did a French defence lecture at Gibraltar one year. That was pretty cool.
Okay, so that's basically the advanced variation. Oh no, or we should mention other sidelines. There's a number of nims which is 4 queen g4 with a pawn on c2. No.
Sorry, pawn on c2.
e5 c5 queen g4.
Oh, the overprotection immortal, wasn't that starting with this?
Yeah, but that was a joke.
Yeah.
And this is not a line that's ever convinced me as being very good, but it's quite tricky to handle. White just allows black to take on d4
because he wants to overprotect e5.
Overprotect e5 and just develops all his pieces.
Yeah, a strong point is created on e5 here. Hans Mock or something. So the queen can, the bishop can come here. The queen can actually overprotect from h2 if needed. e5, just joking.
Yeah, I've just seen that. I think there was a game Nimzowitsch against Hackanson, I think, where right, black's queen ended up on a8, just trapped in by white's pawns. This is probably not very good, but it's tricky to handle. Anyway, so what other possibilities are there on the fourth move? There aren't really very many, are there? e5, c5.
I wonder if we should go for a French defence part 2 if needed in the future. And this is some really major variations we should. I think this has been a long session so far, hasn't it? This video. Should we go into a part 2 in the future, Paul, or should we carry on?
Okay, well, we can do part 2 if you want, but it'll be much shorter.
Okay, let's try and capture the main stuff then, if there's any main stuff.
We've done the 3 knight c3, 3 knight d2, 3 e5. So we're now on to more unusual moves. So unusual third moves we'll start with, and then move on to unusual second moves.
Okay.
So d5, yes, and now f3 is an attempt to get into a black marred dimer after d takes e4, knight c3. But the black marred dimer is not very good.
So the two realistic opponents, if they take, they're really asking for trouble, especially in blitz.
Yeah, especially with a pawn on e6. This is a good line of the black marred dimer, relatively.
Yeah. So because the bishop's not outside the pawn chain, is it? It's not coming to g4 or anything.
So I would probably play. I think c5 looks more, not here, the move before.
Yeah.
After d takes e4, knight c3, c5.
Or even, what about e5? Is that? Or actually, after f3. Okay, not e5 there. So it takes knight c3. Not e5 here. Okay, so c5 you think is better than
c5 looks more logical if we played e6 already.
Yeah, to put the break on d5. Yeah. you've sort of fixed that target, that
I
default.
mean, we should briefly mention, just in case anyone's wondering, after f3, d takes e4. If white recaptures on e4, then d takes e4. If then queen h4 check
It's horrible.
is not good.
Yeah, horrible. You lose a rook or something.
Well, you don't lose a rook, but if you do that, you do.
Yeah.
King d2 is probably best, but I wouldn't recommend this position for white.
No, unless you really want to surprise the opponent.
No, let's not do. Another move is bishop d3, which I played a bit as a junior. It's not particularly good, but it's a move. And here we have a gambit that I invented, actually, briefly mentioned. After if black plays knight f6, that's not a problem at all, because after e5, white has a good version of other lines. So knight f6 is not challenging at all. So black should either take it, and
we get something new here. This bishop on e4.
No, after knight f6, the idea is to drop bishop back to f3 with pressure on the long diagonal.
Yes, distinctly different.
Unfortunately, it's not particularly good. Black can just play with c5, and after natural knight e2, knight c6 is a good move. Just hitting the pawn, and white doesn't particularly want to take on c6.
Yeah.
Because it gives up its good bishop.
Yeah.
Though it's playable. Black has more pawn islands. Black has the two bishops, and I don't think it's a serious problem.
Yeah.
An alternative for black is I think d takes e4 is the best move, but c5 leads to no, not here. Move before leads to the famous Georgiou gambit after e takes d5. Of course, e takes d5 leads back to Tarrasch type position. So after queen takes d5, I played knight c3.
Look quite logical to accelerate development.
And now queen takes g2 loses the queen to bishop e4.
Ouch.
So you don't want to play that. And if the queen retreats, white can play d5. Again,
d5?
This is quite good, because obviously black can't take that, because he will drop his queen. We can take e takes d5, then knight takes d5, queen takes d5.
And there's bishop e5
bishop
check.
e5 check. So d5 drives a wedge in. So
yes. But say knight f6 here? Is that possible? I suppose
it's possible.
Queen e2.
Yeah, queen e2 looks, or possibly just take and play knight f3.
Right. Yeah. Unusual positions in the French here.
So
Arise.
So after queen takes d5, knight c3, black, this is the main line of the gambit, black takes on d4, and then white plays knight f3, the queen drops back probably to d8, and now white can play queen e2 maybe.
Oh, with the idea of castling queen.
Bishop g5 and castle. What white seems to have a lot of pieces out.
Yes, and the d file is very nice, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. It looks intuitively very good. Well done, Paul.
I'm not sure it is very good, but it's certainly worth thinking about. But I think 3d takes e4 is a better move. But
so bishop d3, very interesting move, bishop d3. It's not going to be covered by many people.
White does have some compensation in that line, definitely.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it's objective value.
Yeah.
Another move which has been seen is bishop e3. We shouldn't spend too much time on that. Why not just take the pawn? But this has been played a few times.
f3, is that any good?
It just leads to a not very good sort of black mark-dimer.
Right, where you've committed bishop to e3.
I've always been mystified by bishop e3. I think, well, what is that? But it has been played. And black can always ignore it and just play knight f6 if he really wants.
Yes.
And the bishop's not on a particularly good square.
So if you're going to get an advanced French, it's with a difference, isn't it, with that? Bishop come in.
You could actually go back into some main lines here. But
yeah. So just take the pawn, maybe.
Yeah, I would take the pawn. Okay, so that's all third move alternatives now. So now should we look at second move alternatives? These will be pretty brief. I suppose one of the main ones is knight c3, and after d5, knight f3. then after knight f6, e5, knight fd7, d4. We're back, after c5. We're back looking at this line where white gives up his centre pawns to give squares for his pieces. White takes on c5, etc. A la Nimzovich.
Yes. Maybe bishop d3 and just overprotect e5 again.
Yeah.
Strong point.
Okay, so let's move on from there anyway. Another trigger is g3.
But d3 is very effective.
Let's look at d3
on Chessgames.com against the French defence in particular. The King's Indian attack is more effective here, I think.
As Swanson's played for many years. Of course, black can play c5 here and go into a Sicilian if he wishes.
Yeah.
Or he can play d5, which is white will presumably play knight d2, leading to a King's Indian attack. Where black has various ways of playing it.
Yeah. I think a good way is if white is, but Swanson's too wily for committing his bishop. We had a draw earlier in the season before the one he crushed me in. But if he had done this, you can sometimes just take here and e5, and I had friendly against Adams once in this, and both bishops have got the scope, and this bishop's going to be blocked behind the pawn. So sometimes that paradoxical tempo losing e5 is good if it's justified.
Well, white should wait with knight f3 before committing his bishop. For example, after knight d2, what does black do? If knight c6, then I'm going to play knight f3 and bishop e2. You've already indicated what you're doing. And after if black plays knight f6,
I think I played a5 or something in one game. Sorry, but whose move? It's white's move here. So give me a move for white.
Knight f3.
Alright, so I think if knight f6 you're going to play e5, are you?
I can just play bishop e2.
Alright, yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay. It's quite popular though, d3 as a move, as a second move. It is very popular, I think, on chess games.
Well, it's quite logical. You can play it against different openings. You can play it against the Caro-Kann, you can play it against the French, you can play it against the Sicilian.
And Fischer had an interest in this earlier in his career to play King's Indian attack. Is that because he was secretly working on his sharper opening repertoire later, or he just played this maybe when he didn't know much theory?
I don't know, to be honest. But he did play it against the Sicilian a few times, I remember.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he played against the Caro-Kann, for example. But I mean, 2d3, I mean, it's a very, very practical idea. I mean, you play it against different openings. There's not a lot of theory to learn.
Yeah.
Non-theoretical positions.
And it is like the King's Indian, you're finchettoing your bishop and you're just trying to get pressure. You sort of get a coiled spring, don't you, of pressure behind pawns, and it springs out later.
Yeah, let's go through the main sort of line. So d5, knight d2, knight f6, knight f3, c5. Would you play e5 here, or is it too early? Or you play g3 then you first. Knight c6, bishop g2. You get this sort of position, bishop e7. Now sort of e5, knight fd. So, well, no, you'd probably castle first actually, so you can play rook e1. So white castles, black castles. Now you play e5, knight e7, rook e1, and white will play on the king side, black will play on the queen side.
I find the idea is like almost a routine procedure of overprotecting e5, playing like h4,
and the knight comes round.
Yeah, like this, and then later you try and probe the dark squares later. So that's like the Fischer plan. You're sort of using the strong point as a basis for the attack. And if black's castled over here, sometimes it works, but sometimes black has good queenside pressure. But there's some classic Fischer games in that, isn't there?
Fischer won 2 or 3 nice games with this line, certainly. Okay, let's briefly look at other possibilities on move 2. Shigarin played queen e2.
Very cheeky idea to try and prevent the natural d5 with that pin on the e-pawn. Quite amusing, really, queen e2. I always forget about the option of queen e2, but it's quite cheeky, isn't it?
I mean, black may be able to play it as a gambit, e takes d5, knight f6, who knows? maybe not.
But if this is not brilliant for black.
No, this is, don't take with the queen. If you're going to play d5.
Yeah, but this tempo game we might as well just quickly check out.
And now white play g3, I would think, or d4, but g3 coming later.
So yeah, even though the bishop's blocked in there, you just use it on that diagonal.
Yes.
So you've got some initiative, and it's comfortable for white, very comfortable.
I seem to remember that Lasker played e5, or possibly he played knight c6, then e5.
All right, so knight c6, but I think c5 would be the most logical, wouldn't it?
Well, c5 again going into Sicilian, yes.
With the queen,
but
might not be ideal.
I think again, white can play a king's Indian attack type position structure. I mean, e5 is quite an amusing move. Play e6 on move 1 and e5 on move 2.
Because the queen's just prove the queen, the use of the queen here. Yeah,
I'm not entirely convinced. I don't think queen e2 is something French players need to be worried about. Another move that's been played is b3. Again, I'm not scared.
Oh, hang on, we haven't mentioned the other gambit. Is that the other gambit? d4. Later on, we should mention that gambit. Let's go back now that you've mentioned b3, d4, d5. Sorry, e4, e6. Oh, it's here. Sorry, this is the position for the gambit where you after d5 you just play bishop b2.
And now d takes e4, knight c3. Yes, is that what you're looking at?
Right. And now it's harder for black to cling on to the pawn, so this isn't as good against the Caro-Kann. I think you've seen my horrible game against Ansel.
After knight f6 you played g4. Is that it? Is that the idea?
That is one of the ideas, and then you can follow up with bishop g2.
Also, you can hit the knight.
Yeah, and that can be very, very pleasant for white, with very nice double fianchetto bishops striking across the centre. Very interesting system, this b3. I have got a video on this b3 system.
I think black can ignore it, and bishop b2, just play knight f6.
Yeah. Now the key thing here, I was checking out on chessgames.com, is you want to play an early queen g4 if you can, I think, before f4.
Right.
Yeah. And that's got some more venom to it. Not much more venom. It's not brilliant for white, but
I doubt very much this is a very good line for white, honestly. But it's probably vaguely playable.
Yeah, knight f6 is probably very logical, if not to give white the dynamism. But in this era we're in with engines, I think a lot of people are starting to play more like engines, and they try and play the strongest move in the position, even if it's not the most easy to play. They'd be influenced a bit like that by that engine culture. So taking must be like the engine recommendation to take the pawn, and you can end up getting a good gambit sometimes.
Another move I've played is 2g3. That's not 2.
Sorry, pardon me.
Especially good either after d5, bishop g2. I've played d takes e4, knight c3, and if f5, then f3. Yes,
because these could be exposed later on these files.
With some compensation.
Yeah. Also, there's a very annoying move you played once in a blitz against. Was it a blitz junior or something? You played e5 against me. e5.
Yeah, e5 again, not a very good move.
But it can be quite positionally dangerous. If black plays...
I also played it against Jonathan Rowson against the Sicilian, I seem to remember.
All right. So d5 you can take here.
Yes. But you just take with the c-pawn, why not?
C-pawn's best, you think?
Probably slightly.
Yeah. So if bishop takes, what can you look forward to of interest, unique interest here?
An untheoretical game. And white should play d4 and we just get on with it.
Yeah. There isn't any crazy Queen H5 Nakamura stuff we should mention, is there?
Queen H5 here is really just no good.
No, just knight f6. There's nothing to attack. It's not attacking anything.
Right, but
c4.
Right. This is rather interesting. I'm just going to mention this because I actually played at King's Head rapid play last weekend, and I had 2 games with the French with rather interesting opening ideas played against me. One was against chap called Shane McCabe, who's rated about 164, and then he played C4,
Yes.
which is generally not thought of particularly highly, because black can play D5.
Yes.
And
have you ever thought in this position though you can just emphasise D4? You can play E5. It looks like a bad line of the English.
But it's possible.
Yeah.
C5 is also possible, but here what used to be played was white used to take on D5 twice, so C takes, E takes, and now if Queen takes you gain a tempo with Knight C3, and that's okay. And if Knight F6 instead, then white plays Bishop B5 check type ideas and tries to keep the extra pawn.
This looks like theory from Caro-Kann or something.
But this is not as good as the Caro-Kann lines.
Right.
This is better for black than the Caro-Kann lines.
Because that's a major move, isn't it? Against the Caro-Kann, this C4 is a major move.
Yeah.
If E4, C6.
But what he
C4.
actually played was quite interesting.
Right. Okay. Let's have a quick look then.
And so D5, he played C takes, E takes, and he played E5.
Yes, just keeping the pawn chain intact. So he's reduced your central tension.
And he's taken away the F6 square from my knight.
Yes.
It's not entirely certain what I should do here. I actually got into some trouble early in this game, though I won after some complications in the middle game.
Yeah, I'm not really sure that would be the best move, D5. I think E5 has got a lot going for it here. Just marking out the D4 squares. I've seen this in the English Opening. It's a very good move.
But white can play Knight F3 and D4.
Probably. Yeah, I think it's going to be okay for black. I think I've analysed that before. But okay, let's go with this D5 though. Yeah, it looks as though this is an interesting idea. This E5.
And
yeah.
I played C5 and he played D4.
D4.
Yeah.
And what do we have here exactly? Yes, what do we have? Something unique, I think.
This, I think, requires further attention. It's quite. White's piece is all very nice. Bishop coming out to B5. Bishop coming out to G5 soon.
What about just Knight C6?
Yeah, is what I play. Maybe I took on D4. I can't remember. But it's interesting and.
Yeah. It's worth looking at.
And definitely a viable line, I would say. And then later on, I had another move I'd never seen before.
Was it F4?
Well, I've seen F4 before.
That's not particularly. Should we quickly mention why?
Okay.
Because D5 is usually good because you get that F5, that beautiful F5. You know, you can even maybe play like this. Just emphasise F5.
Yeah.
But I think it's still got some venom for it for white.
Yeah, this is similar to what actually happened against Grandmaster Chernayev. I was rather surprised by his second move, which I never seen before, which was C3.
Whoa!
And
C3.
And I thought, well, what's he up to here? I thought, well, obviously, one option is to go into a C3 Sicilian with C5, but I didn't fancy that.
Yes.
So I thought he was just trying to gain time on the clock. So I played D5,
Yes.
expecting E5, which he played.
Yes.
And I played C5,
Yeah.
expecting D4, and he played F4,
Ah.
which goes back into F4 type lines.
It's totally confusing. The knight's also got a nice reroute
And
possible
he
here.
did. He rerouted his knight went back to C2 via A3, and he eventually won a long hard game.
Yeah.
But
Every system has its perks, I think. There's a perk on that C2 manoeuvre.
But I was really surprised by 2C3.
Yeah. Surprise weapons. These could be exceptionally dangerous in blitz for the unprepared, bewildered opponents. Moves like this. So yeah, there's a lot of wealth of options in the French defence. Shall we quickly summarise in a nutshell, though, that the main lines of the French defence usually involve this position, and usually involve either E5, E takes, Knight C3 or Knight D2. Those are the main moves for white,
Yes.
which I think we've touched on just very briefly in this video. But remember, there's lots of books, videos on very specific variations. The sharpest, most violent lines, the Winawer. The most positional, like the maybe classical lines where the centre's closed. No, they can all be sharp potentially though, can't they?
I mean, there's a lot of potential for dynamism on both sides. I mean, knight c3 is the most aggressive response on move 3. Knight d2 is more positional. E5 is more of a direct challenge. I'm going to close in your bishop and try and clamp down on your position.
Yeah.
E takes d5 is rather wimpy.
Yeah.
and white has lots of sidelines.
Yeah.
But I imagine that knight c3, knight d2 and e5 are white's 3 best tries.
Yeah.
On move 3 for a serious advantage. Other sidelines are probably not good for much more than equality.
Okay, I hope you got something from this video, and if there's any sub-variations you want us to focus in the future, we're going to make a note of those, like with the Sicilian video we did last week. And but I hope as a general overview this was maybe more detailed than the overview we did last week, but I think we've been playing the French defence more between us a lot more than Sicilian actually. So I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube, and okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.